When you think of the legendary tank aces of World War II, who comes to mind? Maybe Michael Wittmann, or possibly Otto Carius. Their names echo through history, celebrated for their almost unbelievable kill counts. They have monuments, books, and films dedicated to their daring exploits. But what if I told you there was another, a shadow in the ranks, an ace whose total number of tank kills eclipses even the most famous of them? An absolute master of armored warfare who, despite his success, remains largely an unknown figure. A man whose modesty and distaste for Nazi ideology kept him out of the limelight. His name was Kurt Knispel. Knispel was credited with at least 168 confirmed tank kills, making him, by many accounts, the deadliest tank gunner and commander in history. That number, 168, is a staggering statistic. A number that whispers of hundreds of intense, close-range battles, of quick thinking, steady nerves, and an almost supernatural talent for gunnery. But his story isn't just about a score. It's about a man who preferred the grit and mud of the battlefield to the glory and parades of the Reich. Born in 1921 in a small, ethnically German town in Czechoslovakia, Knispel's early life was simple. He wasn't a firebrand nationalist, he was a mechanic's apprentice. A practical young man whose hands were already familiar with the inner workings of complex machinery. When he volunteered for the German army in 1940, it wasn't necessarily out of ideological fervor, but more out of a sense of duty and the simple fact that he was part of the generation that was being called upon. His training began not on the massive, heavy tanks he would later command, but on lighter vehicles like the Panzer I and the Panzer II. These early months were crucial. He showed an almost immediate aptitude for the technical side of the tank, particularly the main gun. It was here, in the cold, precise world of ballistics and mechanics, that Knispel found his calling. His instructors quickly recognized his natural talent, noting his ability to spot targets at incredible distances and his uncanny accuracy with the main cannon. But it was the summer of 1941, the invasion of the Soviet Union, that would be the crucible for Knispel and the entire German Wehrmacht. Operation Barbarossa was a brutal, sprawling conflict, a war of vast distances and relentless combat. Knispel served initially as a gunner on a Panzer IV, a reliable but increasingly outmatched medium tank. Imagine the young Knispel, just 20 years old, deep inside the cramped, noisy turret. The smell of oil, cordite, and fear. The ground shaking from explosions. The endless Russian steppes stretching out around him. This was the environment where his legend began to take root. His early engagements were a series of rapid, successful actions. Knispel wasn't a glory hound who sought out the easiest targets. He was known for being cool under pressure, methodical, and having an extraordinary sense of situational awareness. He had a sixth sense for where the enemy tanks were hiding, often spotting them before his commander or the rest of his crew. It was during these early battles that Knispel established his reputation as an extraordinary marksman. The Panzer IV's short-barreled main gun, initially designed for infantry support, was struggling to penetrate the armor of the T-34, a revolutionary tank that shocked the German forces. Yet even with this handicap, Knispel found ways. He wasn't content with just hitting the tank. He aimed for the most vulnerable spots: the turret ring, the driver's vision port, the joint between the hull and the tracks. It was precision under chaos. By the end of 1942, Knispel had already accrued a formidable number of kills, enough to earn him the Iron Cross, second and first class. He was proving himself to be an invaluable asset. But more than that, he was establishing a reputation among his comrades not just as a killer, but as a dependable man. His time on the Eastern Front in the early war was a constant cycle of attack, defense, repair, and rest. He saw the shift in the balance of power, the increasing firepower and resilience of the Soviet tanks, and the growing attrition of the German army. As the war ground on, the German High Command realized they needed a heavier punch. This is where the story shifts dramatically for Knispel. He was selected to transition to a new beast of a machine, a weapon that would change the face of armored warfare, the Tiger I heavy tank. This transition was a testament to his skill, as only the most capable and trusted crews were given charge of the new, complex, and desperately needed Tigers. And it is with the mighty Tiger I that Knispel's true legend would be forged. transforming him from a talented gunner into the most effective tank ace in history. But that's a story for the next part, a chapter of metal, mud, and a man fighting a war he didn't believe in, a chapter that truly defines the deadliest ace you've never heard of.
When Kurt Knispel climbed into the gunner seat of the Tiger I heavy tank for the first time, he was sitting in a machine that represented the absolute pinnacle of early war German engineering. It was a beast, weighing over 54 tons, armed with the devastating 8.8-centimeter KWK-36 cannon. This wasn't just an upgrade from the Panzer IV, it was a fundamental shift in power. For Knispel, a man whose gunnery skills were already legendary, the Tiger's gun was the perfect instrument for his terrifying talent. It was during the massive tank battles of 1943 that Knispel, now often serving as both a gunner and eventually a commander, truly came into his own. His unit, the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion, was often thrown into the thickest fighting, acting as a crucial fire brigade to stem the massive Soviet counteroffensives. Consider the Battle of Kursk in July 1943, the largest tank battle in history. The landscape was thick with dust, smoke, and the constant roar of engines and artillery. In this metal-on-metal grinder, Knispel's crew was a force of nature. His kills weren't just the result of the Tiger's superior armor, they were the result of his speed of thought. While many tank crews would fire a few ranging shots before a hit, Knispel was consistently known for the first shot kill. He had an innate ability to judge distance, speed, and trajectory in a split second, often hitting moving Soviet T-34s and KVs with his very first shell. This skill was crucial because it dramatically reduced the time the Tiger spent exposed and ensured the enemy never had a chance to react. His reputation spread rapidly. Other crews admired his almost icy calmness under fire. He wasn't a reckless warrior, he was a calculated killer. There is a famous, though difficult to completely verify story that perfectly illustrates his commitment to accuracy over vanity. During one engagement, a Soviet tank was retreating and appeared to be disabled. Knispel had a perfect shot. His commander urged him to fire and claim the kill. Knispel looked through his sights, paused, and refused. He simply stated that the tank was clearly abandoned and he would not waste an 88mm round on an already dead target. This wasn't just about conserving ammunition. It was about professional discipline and a deep respect for the power of the weapon in his hands. As the war progressed, Knispel received his promotion to commander, a recognition of his tactical ability and incredible experience. He now commanded the entire crew, making the difficult decisions of movement, target priority, and tactical positioning. However, even as a commander, Knispel would often switch places with his gunner during critical moments, taking the controls himself to ensure a difficult target was destroyed. It was also around this time that the human side of Kurt Knispel became more evident. Unlike other high-profile aces who readily embraced the propaganda machine of the Nazi regime, Knispel was fiercely private and deeply skeptical of the party's ideology. He refused to adopt the stylized image of the perfect Aryan soldier. He was known for wearing his hair long, a direct violation of military regulations, and for wearing a non-regulation goatee. When confronted by officers about his appearance, he would simply shrug it off. Furthermore, he was publicly critical of the Nazi leadership and was known to have defended a captured Soviet soldier from being mistreated by a guard. This action, a direct defiance of the prevailing sentiment, almost led to his court-martial. His superiors had to tread carefully. How could they punish the man who was arguably their most effective fighting soldier? They couldn't, not without risking a massive blow to morale and the loss of a critical asset. Knispel didn't crave medals, nor did he enjoy the frequent trips to Berlin for propaganda appearances, unlike some of his famous counterparts. He simply wanted to be with his crew, maintaining his tank and doing his job. His promotions were often delayed or given reluctantly because of his nonconformist attitude. He didn't have the SS or Wehrmacht high-ranking connections that propelled others to fame. He had only his skill and the unwavering trust of his crew. By late 1944, Knispel had accumulated a truly astounding number of victories. He had survived engagements that would have destroyed lesser crews, often managing to maneuver his heavy Tiger out of desperate situations. But the tide of the war was turning, relentlessly. The German supply lines were strained, the quality of replacement tanks and crews was declining, and the Allied forces were gaining overwhelming air superiority. Knispel and his comrades were fighting a defensive war now, a desperate, rearguard action to delay the inevitable. He was no longer a hunter, he was part of a shield, trying to protect a crumbling front. It was in these final brutal years, commanding the even heavier and more fearsome King Tiger, Tiger II, that he added the final, harrowing victories to his tally. His total kill count continued to climb, a grim marker of the ever-increasing desperation of the war's end. And it's in that final year, in the face of overwhelming odds and the certainty of defeat, that Kurt Knispel's story reaches its tragic and final conclusion, a conclusion that cemented his legend as the deadliest ace who never sought the glory.
The final months of the war were a meat grinder, particularly on the Eastern Front. By early 1945, Kurt Knispel was commanding the formidable Tiger II, or King Tiger, a tank with nearly impenetrable front armor and an even more powerful 88mm gun. But even this behemoth couldn't change the trajectory of the war. Supplies were scarce, fuel was low, and Soviet forces were pushing westward with overwhelming numbers. Knispel and the remnants of the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion were constantly in action, fighting desperate, outnumbered engagements in Hungary and Czechoslovakia. Knispel's total confirmed kills had climbed to an astonishing 168, achieved on all fronts and across multiple tank types. He had become a ghost in the machine, a legendary survivor whose very presence on the battlefield struck fear into the hearts of Soviet tank crews. But luck, even for the most skilled, eventually runs out. On April 28, 1945, near the small town of Verbovec in Czechoslovakia, Knispel's Tiger II was engaged in combat. Details of the final action are, like many elements of his life, somewhat obscured by the fog of war. However, the consensus is that his tank was hit by a devastating round from a Soviet anti-tank gun, or possibly another tank, penetrating the Tiger's armor. Knispel, only 23 years old, was gravely wounded. He was evacuated from the destroyed tank but succumbed to his injuries in a field hospital just 2 days later. He died on April 30, 1945, the same day Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his Berlin bunker, just days before Germany's final, unconditional surrender. Kurt Knispel was buried in a makeshift military cemetery. There were no grand ceremonies, no newsreel cameras, and no fanfare. He died as he lived, a brilliant soldier who did his duty but shunned the propaganda and the spotlight. His life was the polar opposite of the other famous aces whose celebrity was cultivated by the regime. Knispel was the professional who simply wanted to fight and go home. And this is why his story remains the most compelling. His lack of personal ambition and his aversion to Nazi ideology, his long hair and his defense of a prisoner, kept his legend underground. The Nazi propaganda machine couldn't easily co-opt a man who openly criticized the party and refused to conform to their image. They preferred the obedient, clean-cut, fanatical soldier. Knispel was none of those things. For decades after the war, Knispel's extraordinary record was largely confined to the archives of the German military and the memories of his surviving comrades. While Wittmann and Carius became household names in military history circles, Knispel remained the deadliest ace you've never heard of. It wasn't until the early 1990s, with the collapse of the Iron Curtain and better access to historical records, that serious investigation into his scores began. In 2013, his remains were officially located and identified among 15 soldiers at a local church cemetery in Verbovec. He was finally reinterred, officially marking the end of his incredible, if unsung, journey. Kurt Knispel's legacy is not about the celebration of the tank or the regime he fought for. It is a powerful testament to raw, individual talent and professional excellence existing alongside a moral conscience. He stands as an example of a man caught in the machinery of a terrible war, a man who, despite his lethal skill, maintained his humanity and his integrity. His silent, staggering record of 168 confirmed kills speaks volumes about his genius in armored combat, while his personal choices speak even louder about the kind of man he truly was. He remains, quite simply, the greatest tank gunner and commander in history. And with that, we conclude the story of Kurt Knispel. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the echoes of World War II. If you found this story compelling, please take a moment to hit that like button, subscribe to Battle Echoes for more forgotten tales of warfare, and let us know in the comments below what other unsung heroes or historical battles you would like us to cover in future videos. Perhaps the story of the Soviet tank commander, Dmitry Lavrenenko, or the desperate final defense of the German heavy cruiser Admiral Scheer. Let us know your suggestions. Until next time, keep listening to the echoes of history.